Okay, everyone, we're about to begin. It's 1:02. We want to respect your time and we really appreciate you coming to our Social Capital for Economic Equity webinar. It's a webinar that we do monthly as part of Social Capital Builders to spread the message about the importance of social capital to workforce and educational programs throughout the United States. We have a special guest today, but before I introduce him, I just want to tell you a little bit about Social Capital Builders and what we do. Social Capital Builders was created in 2019 to address the economic disparity in the United States through the power of social capital literacy, social network analysis, and social capital development. We provide training to majority workforce programs across the country, as well as schools, in how to teach social capital to young people, and we give them tools in order to develop it. We have several products. One is our Foundations of Social Capital Literacy curriculum. I think it's the first curriculum in the United States that focuses not only on teaching young people about social capital, but it actually helps them make those essential connections to key stakeholders in their family and community who could help them on the career development journey. And then the next product is our My Opportunity Hub, which is a platform that we created to help young people make connections to gainfully employed adults and sustain that connection for a 1-year period with certain activities that can assist them in building social capital. And we're going to talk about what we mean by social capital today. So I am very thrilled to have Tristan Claridge on the call with us today. He is the founder of Social Capital Research. His work and his group's work, as well as many of you on this call, have been instrumental in helping us create the design of social capital builders. We realized long ago that schools were more concerned with measuring what students know than thinking about who they know. And we know that connections are a key to economic opportunity. Not only economic opportunity, as we all know, it's financial, it's economic, it's health, it's social. Many outcomes come from a high level of social capital. And there's also dangers associated with that as well. But the work of academia has been very rarely translated into ways that the public can understand, especially young people. And we felt that this was an important mission to take the literature, to take the research, and to put it in a way that young people, especially those in underserved communities throughout the United States, can comprehend and apply to development of their life. And we've been doing it for quite a few years, and we're seeing a lot of positive gains from the work. So Tristan, thank you and all the researchers as well as the practitioners for following through with the Social Capital Builders. So Tristan, what's popping in New Zealand, man? Let's start off with that. Like, everybody know he's in New Zealand right now. He's not in the United States. Tell us what's going on in New Zealand. How's the weather? How's your family? What's going on?
Well, it's actually about 7 a.m. in New Zealand tomorrow. So it might feel a little bit strange. It's Wednesday for us already. So I guess most people are just waking up at this stage and getting ready for work. But I think New Zealand's in a really interesting point at the moment because as you probably heard, our pandemic response was really positive early on, and we had very few cases. And I think we've only had 50 deaths in total from a population of 5 million people across the 2 years so far. But we're entering a different phase. Like I think a lot of the rest of the world is as well. We're entering a phase where perhaps that solidarity is starting to break down a little bit. We're having more protests about, mask wearing and vaccine mandates and these kinds of things. So I think we're entering a really interesting period in New Zealand where things are changing a little bit, and where it goes exactly, I'm not sure. But I think it's very similar to what's happening in probably most other countries in the world.
Thank you. Tell us something about you. Before we get into social capital research, what are some of the things you like to do? We emphasize to young people about this thing called connection points, and we're going to do an activity with you later on that. But what are some of the things that you like to do? What do you do in your spare time when you're not researching social capital?
Well, social capital takes up so much of my life, and it has done for 20 years. It's really become something that is almost an obsession, where you're thinking about it all the time, and everything that as you move through your life, you're seeing how social capital fits and relates, and that helps to really deepen your understanding as you do that. And I think it feels like after 20 years that it's really shaped who I am as a person. You know, I see giving and I see sharing and helping behaviors, and I see social connections in everything that I do. And I value those things so much more as a result of really understanding what social capital is and how valuable and important it is. So when I'm not doing that, though, which does take up the majority of my time, and I work with a lot of community groups and other organizations all over the world to help them to make use of social capital. So when I'm not doing that, I'm a keen mountain biker. I love getting out in the countryside, especially here in New Zealand. We have fantastic scenery to be able to get out. Anyone who's seen Lord of the Rings has probably seen a bit of the New Zealand countryside. And in fact, interestingly, some people I talk to don't even know that New Zealand is a real place. You know, they've seen Lord of the Rings. It's Middle Earth. It's this fictitious place that doesn't exist, but of course it does. You know, I live here. So mountain biking is great. And I've got a family with a couple of teenagers. So, you know, we love to get out and enjoy the outside as well. And, you know, between family and a bit of cycling and social capital and all the work I do with organizations, it keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely agree with you. It's kind of an addiction. I've started this journey officially about 11 years ago, but I started the company only a few. And it's a passion. You're right. It's just like everything now is social capital. And I think I'm right. Like, you know, my colleagues come into the office and we say, that's social capital. So yes, it's something that's very important to my life. And I think to my community too. We're having a lot of strife here in the United States, a lot of racial bickering. There's a lot of dissension. And I think within social capital, there might be an answer. So we're hoping to add to that and to bring unification together. Let me ask you, why did you start social capital research?
Well, it really started from a bit of a frustration that I had with the concept when I was doing my master's about 21 years ago. Social capital wasn't very well conceptualized. You know, there's a lot of problems with it. And in the end, I didn't feel like I could even apply it in the research context that I was interested in. And so I started social capital research in 2005. And initially, my goal was really just to help other people to understand the concept better. I mean, I didn't particularly understand it myself, I felt, even though I'd spent years studying it. But I wanted to progress that goal. And over the years, as I came to understand it better, and I'd read so much of the literature and I'd synthesized it and helped other people to understand it, eventually I got to the point where I felt like I could probably help others, you know, organizations to understand and make use of social capital. And so just very slowly, I started doing the occasional little bit of consulting, you know, working with organizations. Initially, a lot of it was just pro bono work, just helping people. And then over time, eventually, after, you know, takes 10 years to get good at anything, and it probably took 15, you know, with social capital. And that's basically how it grew. Like my drive really is to help other people to be able to use the concept, whether it's researchers, and, you know, conceptual approaches is one of my big passions, and understanding the theory is really, you know, a passion for me. But then also applying it practically and, you know, helping organizations and individuals as well to make better use of social capital. And I think it improves both individuals' lives as well as entire communities as well.
Is there a favorite definition of social capital that you have? I know there's like over 100, right? And, you know, we use the definition of the value of an individual's connections to people, institutions, and organizations. But what definition do you like? What do you use as social capital research?
It's a fantastic question. And I would have said, you know, I know a lot about social capital, but don't ask me what definition I use, you know, because it continues to be a real challenge. And like when I read all of the popular definitions, to me, none of them really are suitable. None of them really are, you know, sufficient in achieving what I want to communicate about social capital. And I think that's the challenge of trying to break it down into one short statement to say exactly what it is. That's really difficult to do. So if we look at a lot of the popular definitions, they tend to be kind of vague, you know, like Putnam talks about social organization, and he gives, you know, features of social organization. And he seems like he's giving examples when he says networks, norms, and social trust. So that's okay. They're examples of something else, but I'm not quite sure what that something else is. And then he talks about how these things then facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. So then you ask yourself, well, so is networks, norms, and trust not social capital if it doesn't lead to cooperation for mutual benefit? And in the end, I have more questions than I started with. And I'm more unsure about what he actually means by social capital before I even read the definition. So I think sometimes we get really caught up in these, distinct, precise definitions of what something is. And it's actually more useful to talk in more general terms, like your definition speaks to what social capital is. I don't want to pull it apart and say, well, it doesn't really make sense in this way, because I don't think it's helpful overall to do it. So the short answer to your question is, what definition do I like? I don't really like any of them.
Well, so what does social capital look like to you? And I know different contexts, but what does social capital look like for two individuals from the same community? What does that look like?
Well, and now we're talking, I can definitely get past definitions and talk about what social capital really means to me. And I think it's really about when people are predisposed to act towards other people in ways that are positive. So when people are inclined to be helpful and cooperative and giving and sharing and helpful, and when people feel a sense of community and solidarity and goodwill and social identity, but without the negative aspects of that. So without the discrimination and prejudice and anger and hatred towards other groups as well. So I think, talking in those kinds of terms, I think it's quite easy to understand what social capital is really all about.
Help me with this. So, we're spending time training young people on social capital. And part of that is to, have compassion and trust and display reciprocity to even employers, right? And, sometimes young people just say, I want to get this job and he fired me and I don't know why he fired me. But what does it mean for employers to exchange social capital with workers?
Well, it means everything, really. I mean, I think for any employer, their people really are their business. It's their most important resource. It's what allows them to actually get things done. It's how they are seen by the rest of the community, by their customers, is how they work with their employees and how they function as an organization. So, I think it's fundamental to any organization, really, that relationship with the people. And I think a lot of organizations are inclined to overlook it. And perhaps some of the trends in recent decades, or maybe not even recent, going back 50 or 60 years, has been towards seeing employees as human capital, as a means to an end, a way to get things done. And so I think some people have lost sight of how people work more productively, more efficiently, more effectively when they feel supported, when they feel a sense of belonging and identity with the organization, when they have those sorts of shared goals to be able to, come together and work together and contribute collectively towards a common goal. And I think, we often think of ourselves as individuals. I can get this done myself. But of course, we know that when people share information, share skills and expertise, we have the potential to do so much more. Innovation and creativity, just as some examples, often come out of working together and sharing different ideas and perspectives.
Well said. Beautiful. Social capital is made up of many different disciplines. Can you share with us what are some of the main disciplines and which one is your favorite? And I'm going to give you my example. So, I love sociology, right? I really love the study of groups and society, but now I'm getting more into data science, right? Looking at how to apply data science in terms of looking at networks. And one thing we're trying to do at Social Capital Builders is actually look at a way to help people use some type of email network graph to look at who they're connected to in terms of redundancy in your network. And like, if, we know 3/4 of whites don't have any Black friends, right? To say, hey, your network is kind of redundant. It's a closed network. Maybe you can open it up a little bit and do some type of AI prompts to help them do so. And that's further down the line. But when you think about the disciplines, which ones are the dominant ones for you that individuals on this call, and I know all of you on this call represent many different disciplines and bring it all to this social capital pot that we're building internationally. Which ones are to you most important, or which ones stand out? I know it's hard to say which one is most important, but which ones stand out?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the real beauty of social capital is that it potentially brings together lots of different disciplines. Perhaps even every discipline can have some input into understanding what's going on with social capital. And so what you're talking about with, networks, digital technologies, and the way in which we might be able to use those technologies to improve social capital or to change different perspectives, I think, that's a really fascinating area of investigation and thought and research. And it has such important and significant implications across a whole range of different areas of modern life. So I think that's a really fascinating area. And there certainly is quite a bit of research going on in that kind of IT space on social capital. So if I were to pick a discipline that I think is really fascinating and could contribute a lot, perhaps a lot of new knowledge to social capital at the moment, I would say something like social psychology. And I think it's an area that's kind of been under-investigated so far. I think, social capital really started in sociology, probably in the 1980s, late 1980s. And it was mostly in sociology, and economics also sort of chimed in as well. And it was really started as that dynamic between sociology and economics. And some of the original authors, in fact, were very explicit about how they were using social capital to basically overcome some of the shortcomings of the quite narrow theorizing of neoclassical economics. And so it was really mostly sociology, with particularly economists chiming in and disagreeing with the concept and the application of capital to something that was social in this way. And then it kind of just spread, into political science initially, but then into, anthropology and into, environmental science and health. And so every discipline really now has some interest and something to contribute to social capital, because I think at the heart of what social capital is all about is this fundamental question of human cooperation. Why are humans cooperative? And it's that tension between self-interest and community interest. Like, we've evolved to be social, and evolutionary biology and anthropology has a lot of really interesting things to say about how humans have evolved to be social. We've quite literally, our survival relies upon and is dependent upon being social. But we're also individuals. We have agency, we have independent thought, we have our own self-interest. And so I think ultimately social capital ends up being that tension between self-interest and collective interest. And a lot of different disciplines have studied this, investigated this. Philosophy has potentially a lot to say. And I mentioned evolutionary biology, psychology, of course, and therefore social psychology, sociology. Like, all of these things, I think, can contribute to our understanding of what social capital is and how the various mechanisms work within it.
Excellent. We did a survey of Americans. We did a national survey, and 50% of Americans didn't show what we call enough social capital literacy to build a career or help a young person do the same. And we put that report out, and it's on our website. And please read it. And we gave them based on American data from the research about things about, and we're going to give the audience a chance to see your social capital literacy, because we're going to have a quiz and you'll be able to play with us. But what does that mean for you when we say Americans don't have enough social capital literacy to build a career? Do you think people are focusing more on human capital and financial capital in terms of career growth than social capital? And how do we communicate the importance of social capital to not only advance yourself, but to advance your community and society?
I think it's a really good question. I think we're talking about what the sort of changes that have occurred in modern society that's led us to believe that we're independent agents who need to look after our own destiny. We need to do the education and go to the right school and get the right job, and we need to apply for those jobs through these sort of formal processes. And we sort of see ourselves as having to do it ourselves, rather than seeing the collective ability where we can work together. So I think that's kind of fundamental to the reason why most people don't have much in the way of perhaps social capital literacy. And I think it's really interesting when I work with individuals and you start talking about social capital and you start talking about the value that you get from social connections, and not just yourself, of course, personally, but collectively, the sorts of benefits that you get. And people start to realize the importance of being trustworthy, the importance of giving and sharing and building that sort of goodwill. Immediately their perspective seems to shift, very, very quickly away from, competition and individualism towards, oh, hang on, yeah, I can do things a bit differently and I can see the enormous benefit that I can get from it. But we still end up with this tension where we because of our entire culture, the way our society has kind of learned to operate, we still tend to default towards self-interest every time. That's kind of ends up being the way we think about things. And so when you talk to people about going and doing networking, quite often they think of very, instrumental kind of self-interested ways of going out and meeting people. So you've all heard, people going to conferences and their goal was, let's see how many business cards I can get by the end of the conference. And all they were thinking about was themselves. All they were thinking about was just simply, I can get, 55 business cards, and I've just built a huge amount of social capital. I probably didn't use the term social capital, but I've built this huge network without actually thinking about actually creating value in that network, actually building those relational resources. And it really starts with individuals having those sort of, individual characteristics of trustworthiness, of being giving, of being caring towards others. These are the things that actually start to build social capital. And we just automatically, because of the way our society has functioned for so long, we just default back towards the self-interest. And you can see it shift, as people learn about social capital and how important it is and the value and the outcomes that you can get from it. You can see that mindset start to shift towards, community and collective interest, but it just snaps back, keeps going back to self-interest. And it takes time. And every time, you watch the news, that's going to probably push you back towards self-interest again. You go and you talk to somebody else and they're acting self-interested and competitive with you, snaps you back towards that. So, it takes time. And I think that organizations such as yours, Social Capital Builders, it's working at that grassroots level to start to shift those kinds of values and beliefs. And it's what we have to do. We have to start at the bottom. I think it's difficult to say, well, government needs to implement some sort of a policy at the top to start changing these kinds of widespread values within society. I don't think that's really possible.
But it's a major factor, in with the workforce programs we work with. And workforce programs are programs that work with young people ages 16 to 24, traditionally are dropped out of school. They're trying to find their way. They're called so-called disconnected youth. So we think that the way to address disconnection is through connection, right? That's right. So, but you're right. They're focused on the outcome, and the outcome is job placement. So they want to see job placement rates. What we're recommending is connection rates, right? The more you get young people connected to resources, to organizations, to individuals, and help them sustain and maintain those connections, you're going to see labor market participation increase. You're going to see job placements increase. But it's so difficult trying to get anyone to listen because they're focused on the outcome of how many young people got jobs, they're not willing to give it the time to let the social capital grow. So Kim, I don't know if we're ready for this test, but listen, we would be wrong if we didn't go, New Zealand has to go against the USA. Like every country in here, we're gonna have a battle right now, and we're gonna see who has the most. So I wanna go up against the father of social capital right now in terms of our test. So Kim, can you explain the test and take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Ed. Hi, everyone. So we're going to play an online trivia game called Kahoot for our social capital test. If you've never played before, just kind of a fun way to answer questions online. So it's going to be quick. It only has 3 questions, and then we'll go over them after. So I'm going to share with you the link to join, and you'll just go to the website. It's kahoot.it. And then you'll type in the game pin and then you'll type in your name. And once everyone is in, we'll get started. Okay, the link's in the chat box and the game pin 475697. All right, Vance is in. Tristan's in. So Kahoot is a really great website. It's actually free to use and create quizzes on here. So we use it with a lot of our youth programs as a fun way to teach them social capital concepts and vocabulary words, and to review those concepts as well. So you can kind of use it as an introductory tool, or as a review tool, and it's very engaging. You'll see once we get started, but it's a great free tool that's available, and usually young people really like it. They get very excited and into the competitive aspect of it. All right, let's see. It looks like, so we have 18 people on our call. I'll give it another couple seconds if you're still joining in.
I don't know if there's any challenges from different countries about Kahoot, so we apologize for that. But you can answer the questions in the chat so everybody can have a chance to play.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started.
USA, USA, USA. Let's go.
Number 1, when we assume that the average white American has 100 friends, how many of those friends are Black on average? And all the questions and answers in this quiz are based on research, social capital research that we've done, or that's been done by other institutions as well. Oh, one more person answered at the last minute. Very good. So the correct answer is 1 out of 10. Some research shows that the average white American's network is 91% white, which means that there's not a lot of diversity among the people that we know, which can create issues when we're thinking about who we're building social capital with, who holds access to resources, jobs, opportunities, things like that.
And Kim, I think it talks about the redundancy too. And I think Tristan talked about diversity and new ideas and new interests. And, it's something that is a big issue here in the States, and we definitely are trying to address it. But it doesn't mean necessarily racism. We know the concept called homophily, and helping people understand the concept of homophily and some strategies to do to decrease its impact on diversity.
All right, Lenny's in the lead.
Lenny, what? That's the USA, USA, USA.
All right, we got 2 more questions. Number 2, on average, what % of jobs are never posted or are posted improperly? And this again is based on research here in the US. Posted improperly could mean that the job was posted online, but they already had someone in mind for the position. They posted it only for legality reasons. All right, so 7 of you got this one. It is a lot of research says that it's around 70%. So the majority of jobs are never posted or are posted improperly.
So young
meaning
people,
that.
Yes, let me add that because this is so passionate. Young people cannot apply for jobs that they do not know exist. They cannot get motivated to go for careers and to go to school and training if they don't know opportunities are out there. So we're seeing young people just having lack of connection to the world of work because they don't know about the world of work. So we're starting to get this message out on TikTok as well. So it's real interesting trying to help educate young people about some of these dynamics.
Yeah, a lot of workforce development programs, you know, and school programs, they teach young opportunity seekers to, you know, go online and apply for jobs, you know, use Monster, Snag a Job, all those kinds of websites, Indeed. But, you know, we know that a lot of that is not where the jobs are coming from. Oh, JJ jumped in the lead. JJ, what country are you representing? No.
Tristan and I not even on the board. Boy, these Tristan, we gotta make our roles.
All right. USA still in the lead. One more question. On average, what % of Americans get jobs through connections?
Okay. Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah, so this question is a bit misleading because we know that connections is the most effective way to get a job, and it is still the one that is the most common, but it's closer to that 41 to 60%.
And let me add, because I have to, for those who, I think the research in the United States agrees with you. Our research shows it's actually 40, somebody throw a challenge card, right? It's actually around 47%, but it's still the #1 job source method. So when you combine job boards and employment agencies, they still don't equal, or they're not greater than the 47%. Now, however, I think Kim and I have done more of these surveys with anybody on the planet. And we just did it, Kim, I don't even have the data from the young people, but just to give you an example, we have 50 young people enrolled in our social capital program that we meet tonight, Tuesdays and Thursdays for New York City kids. And we asked them to survey 3 of their connections about social capital and how they got their jobs. So the young people did the same survey. Their average score for people in their own immediate network was from 53 to 67%. And why we do that with young people is that we call that the job search success method. So we ask them to identify, and I think this is what is real important for us. We ask young people, we want you to identify the gainfully employed people you have in your life. Go find 3. Here's the answers right here. So 37 of the 50 did it, and these are the results. And you know, they go out there and they get the results. And then so it justifies social capital. It talks about connections, the importance of connections, because that's how. And then we do something called the job search formula. So if you look at the percentages here, we're saying your method of searching for a job should equal that, right? So 51% you should be using connections, 18% you should be using job boards, because this is what worked for the people in your network. But the reason why we really do it is people tell us all the time that young people are not connected to anyone. And we think that's such a big mistake. They have these assets in their community, but the educational system is not thinking about how to help them engage these assets for their long-term success. So the only thing we ask young people to do is to tell all the people they interview is that I'm in a social capital building program. Can I keep you updated on my progress? And what do you think these family members or aunts or former teachers are thinking about these young people when they hear from them each month about the progress they're making in school? They're essentially, in our definition, building social capital with key agents in their community through structured activities that we create in the classroom. So this is and we're seeing a lot of, we're still unfunded, but we're seeing a lot of benefit from the work. So Kim, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was really well said. And you know, we believe that the data speaks for itself, and you know, that it's us telling the young people that we work with that connections are the best way to get jobs is not going to speak to them in the same way as them going out. This is all information collected by youth and reported back by them. So they were able to say that that was how people get jobs. So I think there's a lot of power in letting them discover that answer for themselves and the power of social capital. All right, let me go back to our our quiz results.
Oh yeah, we gotta see the winner.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's not me.
All right, let us know if you're on the podium. Let us know in the chat box what country you're representing. Vance, Leslie. Oh, Jill is our winner, USA.
Hey Jay, and we're
Thank
just
you all for participating.
and and one way we build it is that we ask young people that if they can get a gift for anybody under $20, who would it be and why? So the incentive for winning would be that gift, right? So even in the structure of what we're doing, we're showing the importance of giving, that the gift won't go to you, it'll give somebody that you can give something to talk about all those things that Tristan is talking about are so important. But we try to structure it around not only talking about social capital, but really being about that lifestyle. Okay, great. So Tristan, back to you, my brother. So a few more questions before we go into our next activity. As social capital builders, we measure social capital based on something called the Cardi Index, and you had a chance to look at it. And we're going to do a Cardi activity with you in a second. And we know it's very difficult to measure. So can you tell us, what does research say about trying to measure social capital?
Most of the research really suggests that measuring social capital is all about context. So really putting it into the context of what we're actually interested in. And so if you're measuring social capital in an organization, you might be really interested in trust and trustworthiness and norms. But in a different context, you might be far more interested in connections, say in the case of job search. Clearly, connections is kind of the most important thing to measure. So I think it's quite difficult to identify some of the more intangible aspects of social capital. But the good thing is that we've got a wide spread of different things that we can measure if we're talking in a sort of general sense, because we know there's a whole range of things that create social capital. We know there's a whole lot of things that are social capital, and some of those are quite intangible and difficult to measure, but there's a whole lot of outcomes as well that we can measure. So there's a lot of things that we can select from, that I would say that, getting jobs through social connections is an outcome of social capital, but measuring that will obviously give us an indication of what the social capital actually is. And so I think that as long as we're very purposeful and deliberative about saying, well, we're measuring an outcome, or we're measuring a source, or we're measuring just one aspect of what social capital really is, then we can gather some really useful information about something that is quite intangible, really, ultimately. But we can gather some really useful information about that and start to evaluate what's going on. So I think that's probably the way to go. So I have looked at your CARTI method of measuring social capital, and I really like how tangible it is, particularly for a young person to go in, there's a small number of very easy to answer questions that makes it very, very tangible for them. And so that measure immediately starts to give them an indication of what's going on. But I think also very powerfully, it starts to communicate to them, and they start to realize how important these sorts of social connections are. And so by identifying those connections, they start to realize they're important, so they start to value them more. And so then we start to see all of those other more intangible aspects of social capital that I've been talking about, such as trustworthiness and norms and goodwill and all of these other things. Immediately, people are going to start valuing those things more, and they'll start changing the way they relate to other people, to be more trustworthy, to be more giving and those sorts of things. They start valuing these relationships because, in their CARTI assessment, they literally need to identify these connections, these relationships. So of course, naturally, they're going to value them more than if they weren't using this CARTI method of measuring social capital.
Well, we're going to have a chance. We say networking is an activity and social capital is the outcome. And the outcome is CARTI, right? So, brother, I'm not going to let you go away without doing some social capital building. So, Kim, cue us up, man. We got to go CARTI on New Zealand right now. So, I think, Christian, you're going to start off. And so, first of all, let me talk about a little bit about CARTI, right? So, one, the approach is with the intent of discovery, right? So, we're not trying to judge anyone. It's so we can discover how we can build a better relationship. You don't rate others. You rate your perception of how others rate you. All right. So I think that's key, that we teach opportunity guides, who are the kind of the adults in our model, and we teach the seekers, who are the youth in our model. Right. So I'm rating what I believe Tristan believes about me in these different areas. And if you disagree with the person's assessment, then just ask open-ended questions. Like, for example, so why did you rate it a 4? And then open up the conversation about what can I improve? And we're going to show an example of the Cardi tool in use right now. So let's go to the first one, Kim. We're not going to go all 5 areas. So Tristan, this is you. So how would you rate my understanding of your goals, let's say for social capital research, and your motivation behind those goals on the Cardi scale of 1 to 6, with 1 being low and 6 being high?
Let's say 5. When I just told you, and I assumed you were listening, so let's go with 5.
Right.
Add some.
And what can I do to learn more about your goals?
Well, we could talk more about it. We could communicate, and I could share some of my work and my ambitions.
And what's a good time when we can talk and engage, and how and what method?
Zoom.
Zoom? Okay.
And time, anytime.
Okay. I gotta wear that time difference thing, right?
Well, in the afternoon, in Eastern time in the afternoon. Otherwise, I'll be asleep if it's in your morning.
All right, great. And this is very important for us. So compassion, we define as the understanding of somebody's goals and the willingness to help them achieve those goals, right? So the willingness part, we deal with the second part of Cardi, which is assistance. So it's really understanding. Now, I know compassion is definition around suffering, and we alter it, but it's really the understanding of somebody's professional goals and the underlying reason for those goals. And we think that's an essential part of the social capital building relationship on the youth side as well as the employer side, right? And then convincing employers that you should really know what like you said, Tristan, what the young people want. Maybe you wouldn't have all this great resignation going on right now. Okay, my turn with you. We're gonna go to trust. Okay, so now I'm gonna do you on trust. So how would I rate your belief in my character, ability, and credibility? And I would give that a 4. And the reason I would give that a 4 is because I think you researched us and looked at we're consistent in what we do. I just think that us being a for-profit organization puts a spin on most people's, like, why are they trying to make money doing this? And to explain to you a little bit about why we have that belief in creating generational wealth for people of color would really help you get a little bit more trust in our organization and what we're trying to do. And then you would just say, hey, well, what can we do to build more trust, right? And then we would talk, and then we would have that conversation. So that's just an example of a Cardi tool that we use to help young people, as well as adults in our model, understand what we define as social capital, which is compassion, assistance, reciprocity, trust, and sharing of information. And that it should be, there's no right score, but you should always be trying to build that score with that person you're involved in that social capital building process with at any given point of time. I actually have some of my mentors on here. Feel free to, we'll talk at the end. We'll save some time to talk. So let's continue, Kim. Thank you so much. So Tristan, I have one more question for you. Then we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay. So
before the question, Ed,
sure.
Just had an idea about that. The fact that you live on the other side of the world, and we're quite literally part of different countries, different cultures, different societies, and we operate quite differently. So your understanding of me and my understanding of you really needs to transcend those differences and those boundaries. So if you were talking about somebody else who also lived in the United States, or perhaps in your community, then you would have, foundational understandings about what things mean, and perhaps you would have more or less maybe trust in the other person, or compassion, just because you have that sort of foundational understanding. But I think, it's really fascinating that the things that connect us are our past interactions and the fact that we're both human. I guess that we share some understanding. I know a little bit about US culture and history, and maybe a little about New Zealand culture and history, and therefore we have some foundational understandings, but not a great deal. And so in different contexts, these understandings are going to be a little bit different, and shaped, of course, by those sort of factors, as well as our own experience with each other.
No, and you know what, Kim? He brought up a great thing. Let's take it to the whole connection points activity. So you're absolutely right. And I think here in the United States, and I think all around the world, we want to look at what are some points that help people feel safe with each other and help young people identify them, or teach them how to identify them so they feel more comfortable with the social capital building relationship. So Tristan, what we're going to do is we're going to look at for some common points, and how I get to do that is by getting to know you a little bit. So you know what? Kim is going to spin the wheel and it's going to land on something, and you're going to tell us a little bit about yourself. Let it roll, Kim. So Tristan, how can someone win a gold star with you?
Probably by doing what I like doing, which is really helping others. It's so, I think for most people value the things that they value themselves in others. So, the giving and helpful type behavior, acting in community interest. Like I see you acting in community interest. Yeah, gold star, Ed. Absolutely.
Ding. Yes. Let's do another one, Kim. I like that one.
All right, here we go. Let me remove this one.
Ooh.
I wish I could meet.
Believe it or not, I really want to meet Norman Uphoff. So
who's Norman? Tell me who that is.
So he's a guy that's written about social capital quite a bit over the last 20 years, and he has some really interesting and amazing ideas. And I've never had the opportunity to meet him, and I'd really love to. Like every time I think about who could I get to talk to us about social capital, I always think of him.
All right, so we have to take it to the audience. You do something out there. I didn't know that guy. We have a lot of people in this audience. If anybody has any connections to Norman Uphoff, please put it in the chat if you're willing to share it with myself and Tristan. And if anything, we will just signal to Norman that his name was mentioned at this national webinar. So thank you for that. But that's great. So now you gave me 2 key points about you that I could use to further enhance that social capital building process. And it was very simple and it was very fun, but we don't, I mean American society, and I can't speak about the other countries here. We don't make that a priority for our children. We don't even help them see that. And when we're talking about, we're dealing a lot with, my firm is dealing a lot, Kim and I just came back from Cincinnati. We work with violence prevention workers, and we're employing this model, Tristan, to help people. So these are individuals who have been identified as shooters or likely to be shot, the very high-risk individuals. Because to stop violence in American cities, yes, you want to help the little kids go to school and all that, but you got to address those who are shooting, those who are committing the crime. So what we realize, that to engage them, they need social proof. And the social proof is in the social capital in the community. So our activities have them, well, let's, you can do it. Let's speak to somebody who was in the same situation as you are and figure out how they got out of it. So it's not in terms of social capital to get a job. It's just social capital to get information on how you can, leave that negative lifestyle. And then they're making a connection to somebody who's doing pro-social behaviors. And then we're trying to help the organizations find a way to keep those positive connections or those pro-social connections going. But you know what? That raises a good point that I want to speak to you about. Is there such thing as negative social capital? Because, I tell kids, if you could get it, if you get guns and drugs quicker than you can get a job, you have social capital, but you have the wrong type of social capital. And I don't like saying that, because to me, social capital is not equated with negative effects. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. There's negative outcomes for social capital. So I guess negative types of social capital, if the outcomes that are being produced are negative. And I think the tendency with social capital is just to focus on the positives, because the term capital implies positive outcomes. And we even see that, like talking about definitions, a lot of the definitions quite literally only really allow for and account for positive outcomes. But of course, we know that's not the case. And I think that if we're talking about it at societal level, when we're evaluating or measuring social capital, the tendency is to do what Bob Putnam did and look at things like, well, participation in voluntary associations is a positive thing. It creates trust, and therefore we look at that, and that's our indication of social capital. But that doesn't capture anything about the sorts of negative aspects of social capital that might be occurring in the community. And increasingly, I'm focused on and think about this by how we see other groups, not our own group, but other groups or other types of individuals within our society. So you might be a Republican. How do you view Democrats? Your attitudes towards other people, other groups, basically, if they're negative, and you're likely to not help somebody or in fact hurt somebody as a result of them being outside of your group, if they're the sorts of attitudes and beliefs that exist within a society, then I don't think we could say that we've got strong social capital in our society. So when we're evaluating this, we need to think about, the connections and the trust that exist within groups, but we also need to think about those attitudes outside of the group as well. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic, because we may assume that in order to have an in-group, we have to have an out-group. That we can come together really strongly and have solidarity within a group, but to do so, we have to create an out-group. And I don't think that's really true. Well, it's true on some level that, we need to feel community, but that doesn't mean we need to feel hatred and anger and discrimination and all of these things towards the out-group. And I gave one example of an out-group being, the difference between Republican and Democrat, between political affiliation, but there's many different types of in-groups and out-groups. It could be on the basis of gender, or of race, of ethnicity, of religion, of what school they went to, what region you live in, so many different things. And the attitudes towards those out-groups don't need to be negative. We can still feel compassion and care for people who are not part of our in-group. And so anyone who's interested in this kind of idea, I'd encourage you to have a look at the work of Lyndon Robertson. And Lyndon Robertson talks about the idea of cheap social capital, basically as being this negative, sort of less productive, or even, perverse social capital that is produced.
Cheap social, what was it? Type of social
cheap.
capital?
Yep.
Cheap.
Yep.
Okay, wow.
Not expensive, cheap.
Right. Wow.
and so that idea, I think, is really useful in thinking about how some outcomes of social capital can actually not be very good.
We tell, when we teach young people, we say bonding social capital is important, because that social capital could help you through a hard time, right? So those individuals could really help, but bridging social capital could expose you to opportunities that you didn't know exist. But cheap social capital could really hurt you, right? It could right. limit your ability. That's I love that. That's real good. And what we're facing with Democrats and Republicans in the United States right now is ridiculous. I have friends who are Democrats, I have friends who are Republicans, and they just don't even want, it's just, and I think it's even drawn out on when you look at the polarization or the echo chambers that people are in. It's just amazing. They're not sharing perspectives, and I think it's just a loss to our society. Great.
Right. And people can disagree and they can have different values, but they don't need to hate each other over it. And it's the same thing, not just about politics, but it's about religion and all these other areas as well. Somebody else can have a completely different religion. They can believe in God or not believe in God at all, but it doesn't mean that we need to hate them for it, or have really negative attitudes towards them. So I think there's many ways that we can get past this by seeing the similarities rather than focusing on the differences, by understanding somebody's perspective rather than just simply judging it. And it goes across everything. The bonding, bridging distinction is really good, and it's really intuitive, and it really helps us to understand the value of connections. But it doesn't really do anything to help us to understand the negative side, the discrimination that can occur. And I think it's really important when we think about all of these things, you know, trust and trustworthiness and norms and solidarity, that every time we meet somebody, we're placing them into a box. We're categorizing them as, well, you're a man, you're a woman, you're, you know, black, you're white, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we put someone in a box, we start to think a bit differently about them. You know, we don't know them. We don't know anything about them. We have no relational goods. I don't know if they're trustworthy or they're not trustworthy or anything. But as soon as I start putting them in a box, I start attributing certain beliefs and predispositions to them. And if overall, as a society, we all have negative predispositions towards people in these different boxes and categories, well, then clearly we don't have much social capital, because we meet strangers who we know nothing about and we start attributing negative predispositions to them.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. I want to open it up, but I have a last, this is very, I don't want to say selfish, but, you know, as we're trying to grow our company, it's about data science. So we're working with data science to help youth and adult job seekers map opportunity networks and their proximity to opportunity. What are some of your thoughts on this, and why would you believe it's important for job seekers to understand centrality, where they are in an opportunity network, so we can get them closer to opportunities that in the United States have been, you know, relegated to the well-connected few?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's because we don't often think about social capital and the benefits of social capital that exist. And so we're kind of blind to the possibilities that may exist through our connections and through our networks. So as soon as we start to map this, as soon as we start to be a bit more deliberative about it, then we start to see the opportunities that exist. And I realize that sounds quite self-interested, that we see the benefits for ourselves, but hopefully we can also see the benefits that exist for other people as well. And I think, you know, we're kind of limited in our social capital by our own mind, you know, by our ability to remember people's names and connections and the relationships we have to them. So anything that we can do to enhance that mental ability, you know, by creating diagrams or lists or mapping it or using software or anything that can enhance that ability, can enhance the social capital that we have. And so I think it's really useful to do that sort of process. And as I was saying earlier, any time that we're being quite deliberative about social capital, about identifying the value of connections, it actually changes so many other aspects of our behavior towards these people. You know, if I'm developing a sort of a diagram network of my connections, I don't want anyone to drop off that network. I don't want to lose a connection. So I'm less likely to betray somebody's trust, you know, to not help them when they're in need, because I want to foster my connections. And so you can see how, like, those sort of processes can be really effective in changing people's attitudes towards how they relate to others.
We do something called the danger quotient exercise with young people. So we ask them to list 10 friends, and we have a danger column and then the alive and free column. So we say, put an X if they lead you to danger, right? And that means what it means, or an A column, if they lead you to alive and free. So if you have 10 friends and 6 of them lead you to danger and only 4 of them lead you to alive and free, you have a 60% danger quotient. And then we ask them, well, how can you reduce your danger quotient? And you got me, most of the times young people respond, I can change that person to positive, right? So they're thinking about, I don't want to lose the person in my network. I want to change them. My advice is get rid of them and bring in somebody else. But you're right, like it's and now that's hard to do. We tell you, that's very hard to change. You can't even change yourself. It's trying to change somebody else, but it is a way of helping them look at their network, who they're connected to, and who's bringing in the positive and the negative. I want to open it up to anyone. Everyone, feel free to ask in the chat. Do we have any questions, Kim? Feel free to ask Tristan any question that you may have related to social capital or the weather in New Zealand. And we'll spend the next 15 minutes in the Q&A.
While people are thinking of questions, I wanted to also talk about something as simple as giving. You know, we often assume that there is just one norm around giving type behaviors, but there's actually at least 3. because in order to give, someone needs to receive. And some people don't like receiving, or they think that it's not okay to receive help. So the norm might be to not receive. And then there's also the norm of asking as well. If you don't ask for help, people don't know that you need help, people are less likely to give. So something as simple as giving actually involves complex norms of asking, receiving, and giving. And in fact, it's even more complicated than that, because different people will, it's okay to give to some people and not to others, or ask for directions from some people. And it's going to be different in different cultures as well. But if I'm on the street and I need help, moving a couple of boxes from my car, it might be normatively appropriate to ask a man to help me move boxes, but it might not be normatively appropriate for me to ask a woman, perhaps. Like, it's going to be different in different places in the world. Even though, of course, there's no difference. Either men and women can both help. Like, there's nothing different, that says that, but normatively it might be different. And so it ends up being really quite complex, the way in which these norms work. And I think it's useful to understand that complexity rather than just thinking there's a single norm and it applies to everybody equally.
Excellent. I think about giving, receiving, and asking. One thing we try to teach young people is they have something called the you try statement, where they have to ask for help, right? So they have to go up to an adult. And so I'll say, hello, Tristan, my name is Ed. I'm in the social capital program. I'm trying to, and they say whatever their goal is, I'm trying to become a nurse. Then they say, what advice, to ask, what advice do you have for me on how can I achieve my goal?
Yeah.
Then they're receiving, right? And then the give is, they say, well, okay, thank you for that information. Is it okay if I update you on my progress? The person always says yes. So now we're teaching the young person the act of giving is just giving that person updates on how well that information they gave you has been put to use.
Absolutely.
So it's not giving in terms of I have to give you money. It's just giving. People are concerned about you and they want to help, and you can give. So
Yep.
that's how we train young people to give, is by keeping those people, their social capital networks, updated on their progress.
And most people really want to give, but if nobody asks, they don't have the permission to give. That's how it is in New Zealand. It probably is similar there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, every time any individual starts to break down or change these norms a little bit, it actually helps everybody. Somebody goes out and asks a question or asks for help, then it makes it more acceptable for other people to also ask for help. Or someone receives help, it makes it more acceptable to receive help, because some people, oh, no, I don't want help, because they feel like they need to be independent on their own or something. So, acknowledging how our behaviors, how our actions can help other people as well, just by shifting what's normatively appropriate, is really powerful.
Can you talk a little bit about, do we have any questions, Kim, before we?
No, I didn't see any in the chat box.
Okay. Does anybody want to ask a question, before we go on? Can you talk a little bit, Tristan, about brokers in social capital and their role? And how do we find them? What's a broker?
By a broker, I think you're meaning somebody who has a lot of influence, who has a lot of social connections.
Yeah, who kind of helps, close structural holes. People.
Yeah. I think you never really know who's going to be that person. And so I think we're quite often pretty quick to judge somebody based on how they look, or, they're a woman or they're a man, or race, ethnicity, so forth. And we actually don't know who's going to lead us to and provide us with opportunities at some point in the future, or make some sort of really important connection that change our life and perhaps somebody else's life as well. And so I think we kind of need to stop being calculating so much and trying to work out, well, that person's a CEO, so I need to connect with them. Because you might connect with a homeless person on the street whose brother, provides the perfect opportunity for you to get a job, or whatever it is that might actually advance your life and theirs as well. And so I think we kind of need to shift the mindset we have towards identifying brokers, that we can't really predict what it is, who it's going to be. And I think it's the same attitude that we have towards so much of how we operate socially, is that we're looking for that immediate benefit. Like, oh, I'll connect with them because they'll immediately be able to help me with something or other. And change that to, the Godfather kind of attitude. I'll do this favor for you, and at some point in the future, maybe you'll do a favor for me, kind of idea, where we just pay it forward almost. Like we're giving and helpful because at some point maybe we'll get it back. And so I think that's the way to sort of shift it. So identifying that the brokers are the people who really can be beneficial to us. I'd say they're not necessarily who you think they are. They're not necessarily the CEOs or the super rich people or whoever it might be, because quite often they're actually quite closed. They're constantly being bombarded with requests on themselves and their time and their network. So it's often not them. It's often just ordinary people.
Great way to close out the conversation. And so can you tell, people here who are going to watch the video, how can they learn more about social capital research and all the webinars and information that you put out?
Well, academically, I've got a website that's got a few hundred articles about it. Some of those articles are much less academic, of course, but a lot of it's pretty academic. But I think we need a lot more work to try to translate these kind of economic, sociological, philosophical concepts into language that people can understand more readily. So I think the sort of work that you're doing, Ed, and Social Capital Builders is doing exactly that. You're finding ways to communicate this in ways people can understand really easily. So I'd say my website, but of course, a lot of people are now talking about social capital. It's really entered the mainstream, the sort of public discourse. And so I think there's a lot of people who are writing about it and talking about it. And I did a quick Google search earlier, and I found 2.3 million results on Google for social capital. So there's a huge amount of resources out there to start learning about this.
So my saying is, as long as I know you, I'll never go broke. And I don't mean in terms of money, but I mean in terms of friendship. So I look forward to building this relationship with you over the many years to come. And I learned a little bit about you today. And my brother, thank you for all you're doing. And I want to thank everybody for joining us on the Zoom and being part of this. I'll keep it open for 2 or 3 more minutes. And then that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Everyone. Ed and Tristan, there is a question in the chat box.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
If you have time, it just popped up. So if you have time to address it.
So it says, we have already addressed this, but here we go again. As social emotional learning, how is teaching and learning social capital different than teaching and learning social emotional learning? I know we have referred to outcome and we know about context, but let's say we must distinguish to a local school system the difference. For us, we deal a lot with, so programs are teaching young people about social emotional learning, but it's actually application of that social emotional learning skills in the context of relationships. So who are those young people practicing those social emotional learning skills with, and how are you helping them build those people to develop that practice? And in my opinion, how are you equipping the people on the other side of because in social capital building, there should be no giver or receiver, it's reciprocal. And how are you helping those who are agents in this process understand the importance of such? So I would say it's really about helping that young person establish their hub, educating the hub about the social emotional learning skills, and then giving them a venue to practice it where they can see outcomes. Tristan talked about it. I know he's writing about it in his new book. He talked about one skill that I don't think most social emotional learning covers, and he mentioned in memory. And I have done no work. I talk about listening skills. We talk about all those, but not memory. And I think memory is a key thing to add if you're not adding it to your current SEL curriculum, because I think it enhances the social capital building process. Tristan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so Mike, I think that when we're talking about groups and communities, we often think about improving social capital by changing shared understandings, by changing the norms and the trustworthiness and shared identity and shared understandings. But I think if we're talking about individuals, then I tend to look towards individual competencies, people's ability to be able to listen, to be able to communicate effectively, to have empathy, that theory of mind, to be able to understand somebody else's perspective. And if we don't have those kinds of skills, we can see how our ability to build meaningful relationships is significantly impaired. So, part of that is about understanding emotions and understanding other people's emotions. That's very much part of theory of mind and empathy. And our emotional literacy, is another thing, or emotional intelligence is the sorts of things that might be really quite relevant here, which helps us to build those meaningful connections. And I think it also helps to break down the self-interest, the individualism and competition that we so often have, where we don't bother thinking really about the other person's perspective and the other person's needs. So I think, there's a lot of interesting areas there. And I think there's a lot of things that potentially limit our ability to generate social capital just being, our own sort of personal characteristics or our own lack of skills and abilities to be able to do so. I'm not certain I answered your question, Mike.
No, I was just getting ready to say, I hope these last 5 minutes are being recorded because I would like to play it back again. What both of you just shared, it was wonderful. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing as well. All right, well, that concludes our webinar. I just want to thank everyone, especially all the attendees from around the country, around the world who participated, and mainly to Tristan for, making yourself available to our organization and indirectly to the young people we serve. On behalf of a whole bunch of young people, my brother, they're saying good looking out. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Ed.